Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. You grab a cup of coffee, open your paycheck, and notice something that has never happened before. The line that usually takes hundreds of dollars from your salary is completely gone. Federal income tax, $0 at first. You assume it's a payroll mistake. Then your phone starts buzzing. Every major news channel is reporting the same unbelievable headline. The United States has abolished the federal income tax. Millions of Americans celebrate. Some call it the greatest tax cut in history. Others panic. Because one question immediately spreads across the country. If the government isn't collecting income tax anymore, how will America survive? Who pays the military? Who funds the FBI? Who keeps national parks open? Who maintains highways? Who pays federal employees? Without income tax, surely the government would run out of money, right? Most people think there's only one possible answer. Governments need income taxes. Without them, a country eventually goes bankrupt. After all, that's how every modern government seems to work. No income tax, no government. It sounds perfectly logical, but what if I told you America once proved that assumption completely wrong? For more than 120 years, the United States had no permanent federal income tax. Not for 5 years, not for 20 years, for more than a century. And during those years, America didn't collapse, it expanded, it built roads, created a navy, fought wars, purchased enormous territories, and slowly became one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. So now the mystery becomes even bigger. If Americans weren't paying federal income taxes, where did all the money come from? Because governments don't run on hope, they run on revenue. The answer isn't what most people expect. And to understand it, we first have to travel back to a time when America nearly disappeared, not because of war, but because it was completely broke. Chapter 1. The country that won, but was almost bankrupt. The year is 1783. After years of fighting, America has finally defeated the British Empire. You'd expect celebrations, fireworks, victory parades. Instead, behind closed doors, America's leaders are terrified because the country has a secret, a dangerous one. The United States has won its independence, but financially, it's hanging by a thread. If nothing changes soon, the new nation could collapse before it even begins. Most people assume the solution was obvious. The government simply collected taxes, paid its debts, and moved on. That's what every government does, right? Actually, no. Here's the shocking part. The federal government couldn't force Americans to pay taxes, not because it didn't want to, because it legally couldn't. At that time, America operated under the Articles of Confederation. Congress could declare war, sign treaties, represent the nation overseas. But when it needed money, it had only one option. Ask the states. Imagine trying to pay your mortgage by asking your neighbors to voluntarily contribute every month. Some might help. Many wouldn't. That was exactly how America was trying to run an entire country. Congress would request money from each state. Some states paid a little. Others ignored the request. Some simply refused. Meanwhile, the bills kept growing. Foreign countries wanted repayment. Soldiers who had fought for independence still hadn't received everything they were owed. The government had almost no reliable income. European leaders quietly predicted the American experiment wouldn't last. To them, the United States looked less like a rising nation and more like a business already heading toward bankruptcy. If the government couldn't collect taxes, how did America avoid financial disaster? The answer came from a group of men who gathered in Philadelphia, and one decision they made would permanently change the future of the United States. Chapter 2. The meeting that saved America by 1787, America faced a choice. Either strengthen the national government, or risk watching the young country fall apart. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Without money, there would be no stable military, no trusted economy, no confidence from foreign nations, no future. Most people think the meeting in Philadelphia was only about writing a constitution, a document filled with rules, rights, and political compromises. That's true. But it wasn't the biggest problem in the room. The real issue was money. America needed a government that could actually pay its bills, When the delegates finished writing the Constitution, they gave Congress something it had never truly possessed before: the authority to raise federal revenue. Without dependable income, nothing else in the Constitution would matter. Freedom alone couldn't pay soldiers. It couldn't build roads. It couldn't repay national debt. Someone still had to fund the country. But here's where history takes another unexpected turn. Congress finally had the power to tax, yet it still didn't choose an income tax. Instead, one man believed there was a smarter way. His name was Alexander Hamilton. And his idea would fund America for generations, without touching most people's paychecks. Chapter 3, Alexander Hamilton's brilliant solution. Hamilton faced an almost impossible challenge. The government desperately needed money, but the country had just fought a revolution against heavy taxation. If Americans believed their new government had become just as greedy as Britain, everything could fall apart again. Hamilton needed revenue, without creating another revolution. Today, when governments need money, the answer seems obvious: tax people's income. It feels so normal that it's hard to imagine another option. Surely Hamilton thought the same, didn't he? No. Hamilton looked somewhere completely different. Instead of taxing workers, he focused on something arriving in America every single day: ships. Imagine standing on a busy dock in New York Harbor around the year 1800. One ship arrives carrying British cloth. Another unloads French wine. Another brings tea from China. Another carries sugar from the Caribbean. Before a single crate could be unloaded, government officials stepped aboard. They counted the cargo, calculated its value, and collected a fee. This wasn't an income tax. It was called a tariff, or a customs duty. Every imported product generated revenue before it entered the American market. The more ships arrived, the more money flowed into the federal treasury. It was simple, efficient, and for decades, it worked remarkably well. In fact, by the early 1800s, tariffs generated most of the federal government's revenue, often accounting for well over half, and in some years around 80% to 90% of federal income. There was no I.R.S., no annual federal income tax return, no paycheck withholding. The government was funded largely through trade. For many Americans, it probably felt as though there was no federal income tax at all. It sounded like the perfect system. Trade increased. Government revenue increased. Problem solved, or so it seemed, because Hamilton's solution had one hidden weakness. A weakness that became painfully obvious whenever trade slowed down. And when leaders looked for another source of money, they made one decision that sparked one of the first armed rebellions in American history. Not over tea, not over land, but over whiskey. Chapter 4. No one imagined that a tax on alcohol would become the first great test of the new Constitution. At first glance, the tax didn't seem unreasonable. If people made whiskey, they would pay a small tax. Simple. Many people today assume Americans rebelled because they hated paying taxes. After all, the American Revolution itself was partly fueled by disputes over taxation. So this must have been the same story, right? Not exactly. The real problem wasn't the tax itself, it was cash. In the late 1700s, many frontier farmers rarely used money. Banks were scarce. Coins were hard to obtain. Instead, families traded wheat for tools, corn for clothing, livestock for supplies. Their economy ran on barter. Whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was easier to transport than grain, lasted longer, and was often exchanged like money in frontier communities. So when the government demanded a tax in cash, many farmers simply couldn't pay. From their perspective, the government wasn't asking for a reasonable contribution. It was demanding something they didn't have. Suddenly, the new government looked dangerously similar to the one they had fought against only a few years earlier. Anger spread rapidly across western Pennsylvania. Tax collectors were threatened. Government officials were attacked. Some were covered in tar and feathers. Others fled for their lives. The country wasn't just facing angry taxpayers. It was facing open rebellion. America had escaped British rule, only to face armed resistance from its own citizens. If the rebellion succeeded, would the new federal government lose all authority before it had truly begun? Chapter 5. The president who led an army by 1794, the situation had become dangerous. Thousands of armed protesters were gathering. Federal law was openly ignored. If Congress backed down, every future federal law could be challenged the same way. If it used force, the young nation risked tearing itself apart. President George Washington faced an impossible decision. Most people imagine presidents solving crises from behind a desk, sending military orders, holding emergency meetings, letting generals handle the fighting. That's how modern presidents usually respond. Surely Washington did the same. He didn't. George Washington personally rode with the militia, leading nearly 13,000 troops toward western Pennsylvania. To this day, he remains the only sitting U.S. president to personally accompany troops into the field during a domestic uprising. When the militia arrived, most of the rebels scattered without a major battle. The rebellion ended. More importantly, the federal government had proved something. It wasn't just a government on paper. Its laws would be enforced. The Constitution had survived its first great internal test. But even after restoring order, a much bigger problem remained. The whiskey tax had exposed a painful truth. America still didn't have enough reliable income. So where could the government find billions of dollars without starting another rebellion? The answer wasn't hidden in a factory or another tax. It was hidden in the land itself. Chapter 6. The asset few people remember as the population grew. The federal government faced constant expenses. Roads needed to be built. Postal routes expanded. New territories had to be governed. Military forts protected the frontier. Every year, the government's responsibilities grew. Revenue had to grow too. Most people assume America simply borrowed more money or raised more taxes. That's what governments usually do, but America's leaders had another option. One almost impossible to imagine today. The federal government owned an enormous amount of land, not a few thousand acres. Millions upon millions of acres. As settlers moved west, the government surveyed land, divided it into parcels, and sold it. Entire communities were built on land purchased directly from the federal government. Every sale brought fresh revenue into the treasury. In many ways, the government wasn't just collecting taxes. It was operating like one of the largest real estate owners in the world. Then came one of the biggest land deals in history. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. The purchase nearly doubled the size of the United States. Many critics thought Jefferson had made a terrible financial mistake. The government had spent millions on territory that seemed empty and unexplored. But over the following decades, as settlers poured westward, land sales helped generate significant federal revenue and fueled economic expansion. What had looked like an enormous expense slowly became one of America's greatest long-term investments. For decades, the formula seemed unstoppable. Tariffs, land sales, a few excise taxes. America kept growing. So why would anyone even think about creating an income tax? The answer wasn't politics, it was war. Chapter 7. The war that changed everything by the 1860s. The United States faced the greatest crisis in its history, the Civil War. This wasn't a short conflict. It became one of the bloodiest wars Americans had ever fought. Every day, thousands of soldiers needed food, weapons, uniforms, medical care. Railroads transported supplies. Factories worked around the clock. Everything cost money. And unlike previous generations, the government needed that money immediately. Most people assumed tariffs would once again save the government. After all, they had funded America for decades. Surely they could do it one more time. This time, tariffs weren't enough. War spending exploded. The federal government needed revenue on a scale it had never faced before. So in 1861, Congress introduced America's first federal income tax. It was a historic moment. For the first time, some Americans were taxed directly on their income. Many people assume this is when today's income tax system began. But history has one more surprise. The Civil War eventually ended. The government no longer faced wartime expenses. So what happened to the income tax? Did Americans simply accept it forever? Not even close. Because the next twist in this story surprises almost everyone, America got rid of it. Chapter 8. The tax that disappeared. The Civil War was finally over. After 4 brutal years, the fighting had ended. The Union had survived, and America slowly began rebuilding itself. But inside Washington, a different question was being asked. The government had created a federal income tax to pay for the war. The war was over. So should the tax remain? Or had it served its purpose? The answer would shape America's future. Today, most taxes, once introduced, tend to stay. Governments rarely give up a major source of revenue. It's easy to assume the same thing happened after the Civil War. Many people believe America simply kept collecting income taxes from that point onward. It didn't. The Civil War income tax was temporary. As wartime expenses declined, Congress allowed the tax to expire. By 1872, the federal income tax had disappeared. Once again, the federal government relied primarily on tariffs, customs duties, and excise taxes. For millions of Americans, there was once again no permanent federal income tax. It seemed the old system had won. The debate appeared settled, but beneath the surface, America itself was changing faster than anyone had imagined. The government had removed the income tax. So why did people begin demanding that it come back? The answer wasn't found in Washington. It was found in America's factories. Chapter 9. The Age of Giant Fortunes. As the 1800s came to an end, America entered the Industrial Revolution. Railroads stretched across the continent. Steel mills operated day and night. Oil transformed transportation. Cities exploded with growth. Businesses expanded at incredible speed. Never before had America created so much wealth. But prosperity brought a new question: who was benefiting the most? Many people imagine that everyone became richer together. Factories created jobs. Railroads connected markets. The economy expanded. It sounds like a success story for everyone. While millions of Americans did find new opportunities, wealth also became concentrated in the hands of a small number of industrial leaders. Names like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and later many others built companies that reshaped entire industries. To supporters, they were brilliant entrepreneurs. To critics, they symbolized growing economic inequality and corporate power. Meanwhile, many workers faced long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions. Whether government should respond and how became one of the biggest political debates of the era. But many reformers weren't just criticizing wealthy business owners. They were criticizing something else. A tax almost every American had forgotten about: tariffs. Chapter 10. The hidden cost of tariffs for decades. Tariffs had funded the federal government. They helped build the young nation, supported the military, paid government expenses. Everything seemed to work, so why would anyone oppose them? Most people think tariffs only affect foreign countries. After all, the tax is charged when goods enter the United States. So it sounds like foreign exporters pay the bill. If that's true, why would Americans complain? Economists then, and now, have noted that tariffs can raise the cost of imported goods. Businesses that import products may pass some or all of those added costs onto consumers through higher prices. That meant everyday Americans could end up paying more for clothing, tools, sugar, tea, and countless other imported products. Critics argued that tariffs placed a larger burden on consumers while providing a major source of federal revenue. Supporters responded that tariffs protected American manufacturers from foreign competition and encouraged domestic industry. Both arguments had supporters, and the debate became increasingly political. If tariffs were becoming more controversial, what could replace them? Some politicians believed they had found the answer: tax income instead of imports. But there was one problem: the Constitution. By the 1890s, pressure for an income tax was growing. Some lawmakers believed wealthy Americans should contribute more directly to federal revenue. Congress passed a new federal income tax in 1894. It looked like the debate was finally over, until the courts stepped in. Most people assume that if Congress passes a law, the law automatically takes effect. That's usually how government works. In 1895, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust Co. that key parts of the income tax law were unconstitutional because they were considered direct taxes that had not been apportioned among the states as the Constitution then required. The decision didn't say Congress could never tax income, but it created a major constitutional obstacle to a broad federal income tax. Suddenly, supporters realized that passing another ordinary law might not be enough. If they wanted a lasting solution, they needed to change the Constitution itself. Changing the Constitution is incredibly difficult. It requires overwhelming political support. So, how did supporters manage to do it? The answer arrived in one of the most important years in American financial history. The year was 1913. America was no longer a small farming nation, it had become an industrial giant. The federal government was taking on more responsibilities. The old revenue system was under increasing pressure. Something had to change. Many people believe the 16th Amendment suddenly gave Congress a completely new power to tax income. Others argue it changed nothing at all. The truth is more nuanced. The 16th Amendment states that Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes without apportioning those taxes among the states according to population. Its practical effect was to remove the constitutional obstacle highlighted by the Pollock decision and provide a clear constitutional foundation for a permanent federal income tax. At first, the new tax affected only a small percentage of Americans. Most workers paid nothing. The highest earners faced relatively modest rates compared with later decades. No one at the time could fully predict how dramatically the federal tax system would evolve over the next century. But something else happened in 1913. Another institution was created, one that many people still connect with the income tax today, the Federal Reserve. Were the two actually related, or is that one of history's biggest misconceptions? Chapter 13. The Other Revolution of 1913. By 1913, America had changed forever. A permanent federal income tax was now part of the Constitution. But something else happened that same year. Something that still sparks debate more than a century later. Congress created the Federal Reserve System. To many people, that can't be a coincidence. Two of the biggest financial changes in American history happening in the same year, naturally. People began asking the same question that still appears in comment sections today. Were they connected? If two major events happen at the same time, it's easy to assume they were designed as one plan. Some people believe the income tax was created to fund the Federal Reserve. Others believe the Federal Reserve exists because of the income tax. The timing certainly makes it seem possible. Historically, they were created to solve different problems. The 16th Amendment focused on how the federal government could collect revenue. The Federal Reserve was created after repeated banking crises, especially the Panic of 1907, to provide greater stability to the financial system, influence the money supply, and act as a lender of last resort during financial emergencies. Both were approved in 1913. Both transformed America's economy, but they addressed different challenges. That doesn't stop people from debating their broader long-term effects. And that debate continues to this day. But here's a far bigger question. If America once operated without a permanent income tax, could it do that today? Imagine Congress announces tomorrow morning, federal income tax has been abolished. Millions celebrate. Businesses react. Financial markets try to understand what happens next. It sounds exciting. But within hours, another question would dominate every news channel. How would the government replace trillions of dollars in revenue? Some people answer immediately. Just bring back tariffs. After all, tariffs funded America for more than a century. If they worked once, why not now? It sounds like the obvious solution. Today's America is fundamentally different from the America of the 1800s. Back then, the federal government was relatively small. There was no Social Security, no Medicare, no nationwide system of federal retirement benefits, no modern aviation system, no NASA, no vast network of federal agencies. Government spending was only a fraction of what it is today. Modern federal spending supports national defense, healthcare programs, retirement benefits, infrastructure, scientific research, veteran services, debt interest, and many other responsibilities. That doesn't automatically mean today's tax system is the best one, but it does mean replacing the current revenue system would require major policy changes and difficult trade-offs. So if tariffs alone aren't a simple replacement, What about taxing only the wealthy? This question appears almost every time taxes are discussed. If millionaires have so much money, why not let them pay for everything? At first, it sounds simple, even fair. Many people believe this single change could solve the government's financial problems. Raise taxes on the richest Americans, and everyone else pays little or nothing, problem solved. The reality is more complicated. High-income taxpayers already contribute a significant share of federal income tax revenue, but the government also raises revenue through payroll taxes, corporate taxes, excise taxes, tariffs, and other sources. Whether increasing taxes on the wealthiest Americans would generate enough additional revenue, or how it might affect investment, business activity, or economic growth is the subject of ongoing debate among economists and policymakers. There is no universal agreement. Some argue for higher taxes on top earners. Others argue for lower tax rates to encourage investment and job creation. History doesn't provide one simple answer. It provides evidence that different societies have chosen different approaches, which leads to another argument that's becoming increasingly popular. Would tariffs actually be better than income taxes? For more than 100 years, America relied mainly on tariffs. For more than 100 years after that, income taxes became one of the federal government's largest revenue sources. Both systems have shaped American history. So, which one works better? Many people think there's an easy winner. Either tariffs are clearly better, or income taxes are clearly better. Surely history has already answered the question. History suggests that every system involves trade-offs. Tariffs can encourage domestic manufacturing and generate government revenue, but they can also increase the cost of imported goods and affect international trade. Income taxes can provide a stable source of revenue tied to earnings, but they are often criticized for their complexity and for reducing take-home pay. Most modern economies use a combination of different taxes rather than relying on only one source. The real debate has never been whether taxes should exist. It's about which mix of taxes best supports a country's goals while minimizing unintended consequences. After everything we've explored, we're back to the same mystery that started this story. In AL chapter, the lesson history leaves behind. Imagine opening your paycheck tomorrow. No federal income tax. For many people, that sounds like freedom. For others, it raises difficult questions about how a modern nation would fund everything it does. History gives us one clear lesson. The United States did survive for more than a century without a permanent federal income tax. It relied on tariffs, customs duties, excise taxes, land sales, and a much smaller federal government. But history also shows that America itself changed. The country became larger, more industrialized, more connected, and its government took on responsibilities that earlier generations never imagined. That's why the debate over taxes has never truly ended. Should governments rely more on tariffs? Should income taxes be lower? Should the wealthy pay more? Should spending be reduced instead? These aren't new questions. Americans have been asking them for more than 200 years, and they will probably continue asking them for generations to come. Because the debate has never really been about taxes. It's about something much bigger. What is the proper role of government? And how should a nation pay for the future it wants to build? Only you can decide where you stand. If this video changed the way you think about American history, then you'll enjoy what's coming next, because this was only one chapter in the story of money.